TanStack is solving yet another problem in the JavaScript world, this time with TanStack DB. A reactive client store for building super fast apps on sync. It actually extends TanStack query with collections, live queries, and optimistic mutations that keep your UI reactive, consistent, and blazing fast. Think of it as TanStack Query meets client-side database, which is perfect for local-first, collaborative, or offline-friendly apps. So once you hit that subscribe button, let's take a look. Now, it's worth noting that TanStack DB is in an early alpha preview, so much so that I wanted to make this video earlier, but instead was submitting some bug reports to get the demo up and running for you guys in this video. That aside, let's take a look at what we can get out of TanStack DB at the moment. You get a blazing fast query engine, fine-grained reactivity, robust transaction primitives, and normalized data. So let's jump straight into a demo and see how you would add this to your applications. Now, at the moment, there's two ways that you can use this library. The first one is using TanStack Query with an existing REST API, and the second one is actually using Electric SQL Sync Engine with a generic ingestion endpoint. Electric SQL actually worked alongside TanStack to create this library, which is super cool to see. We'll start out with the query one here on a simple to-do app. Now, this one I've already implemented TanStack DB. You can see that everything is just blazing fast. We get those optimistic mutations. We can delete things, add things just all really quickly. That is the benefit of something like this. You can also see if I go into my backend here and change a value, if I change this one back to 5, for example, and go back to my application, you can see that it's already updated the value to say 5. It's synced it already before I even had time to switch back. If we jump into the code for the demo that I just showed you, what you can see here is I'm setting up a TanStack query client as we're using the query collection type, and then everything in TanStack DB starts with what is called a collection. A collection is just a typed set of objects, whether that's going to be your to-dos, users, whatever data that may be, that you can populate from something like a REST endpoint via TanStack Query, Electric SQL, or even plain in-memory data. Think of it as your single source of truth on the client, but one that's always watching its data as well. So here we've actually set the refetch interval to 3000 milliseconds. This is actually going to poll the data every 3 seconds. Then you can see my query function here is similar to how we use TanStack Query. This is just one that goes ahead and gets all of my to-dos from a REST API. Then we have the get ID, so it knows what IDs we're looking at. In this case, it's just item ID, but then we make that a string. And then we also pass it the XOD schema for validating that the data coming in is the data that we're expecting. And then finally, we pass it here, the query client. And you can see if you've used TanStack Query before, this is actually going to look a little similar to you. Once you have your collection set up for the data that you need, to actually read that data, we then use a live query. You can see down here, I have a use live query hook. And then we have something that looks a little like SQL. This is a SQL flavored data call. Now this is actually powered by D22S under the hood, which is a differential data flow engine. But all you need to care about is this is essentially what makes TanStack DB super fast. What's also really cool about live queries is that they support joins across collections. So we had multiple collections and we needed that data to be merged somehow on our client. We can simply do that from here by just saying .join and then adding that collection on with whatever logic that we need. This allows us to do some really powerful things. It allows us to load in normalized data into our collections and then denormalize it through our queries. So we can simplify our backend by not needing those bespoke APIs that match our client-side data. But it also allows you to merge multiple sources of data. So you could have 2 different databases or API, and then you can join that data on the front end without having to change any of the back-end code. The final part of TanStack DB is your optimistic mutations. That's what this library is all about, really. And it actually used to be called TanStack/optimistic, but they recently renamed it to TanStack DB. As you can see here, I have my add to-do optimistic mutation. We use the use optimistic mutation hook, and we pass it a mutation function. Inside of this mutation function in my demo, all I'm getting is the actual mutation itself, so what data has been modified. You can also get the original off of this mutation as well, if you need to make some comparisons. And then I simply just send this off to my to-do to create the to-do from that modified mutation that we have there, which in this case will be a whole new to-do. And then finally, you just invalidate the collection so that it refreshes live data straight away. This means that when the final await resolves, the collection is up to date with the latest changes and the optimistic state is safely discarded. The collection actually blocks applying updates while this function is running, and the optimistic state is dropped at the exact same time as the backend state is applied, so there's never any flicker on your UI. When it comes to actually using the add to do optimistic mutation, you can see here inside of my handle submit for that input, all we have is add to do.mutate, and then inside of here, you make the change to the collection that you want. So in this case, I'm doing to do collection.insert. This can also be update or delete. And then I'm just inserting the new data into the collection. So this will be handled optimistically. And then once it knows the transactions that need to occur, it will go ahead and run our optimistic mutation, send the data off to our API, and then update the data from the database itself. So it makes that flow really easy. Now, if you're struggling to understand what TanStack DB is actually doing from that code, I think this diagram explains it really well. It creates a unidirectional data flow. So let's imagine that add to do example that we just looked at. When we actually fire off the add to do from the form, it's going to send the persistent mutation to our server to actually update the database. But what it also does is does this inner loop of optimistic state updating. So it updates our client collection here, and then that goes ahead and updates the components that are looking at that collection. So in our case, it's going to be the to-do list. This all happens optimistically, so it looks super fast to the user. Then after a certain amount of time, the server state is synced back into the collections to make sure that the collection is up to date with whatever the database is displaying. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, there are actually two ways that you can use TanStack DB at the moment. One of them was using that query collection, which we looked at earlier, and the other way is using Electric SQL, which helped develop this library. As you can see, it says one of the most powerful ways of using TanStack DB is with the sync engine for a fully local first experience with real-time sync. So Electric SQL is a sync engine that you can point to your Postgres database, and it's really nice. As you can see here, it's pretty similar in how we actually set this up. Instead of doing create query collection, all you need to do is say create electric collection and then just pass in the data for wherever you're hosting that Electric SQL instance. Then we define a mutation function again. In this case, they actually post the data to a generic endpoint called ingest mutations. That's Electric SQL specific. You can see that the setup down here is similar. When we want to make a mutation, we say use optimistic mutation and pass through the mutation function, and the live query stuff will be exactly the same as well. There we go. I'm really excited for this library to develop. It's solving quite a big pain point in the JavaScript world. The only other people I've seen do this well are the Convex team. Now let me know if you want me to cover any other TanStack libraries. It really is taking over the JavaScript ecosystem. Let me know what you think of this one down in the comments as well. While you're there, subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one.